Hello, my name is Kat Murphy. I'm a licensed master social worker. I have been working as a school social worker for the last 10 years at the Texas School for the Deaf. Welcome to my webinar on reducing trauma by knowing what to expect when reporting to the Department of Family Protective Services. The Department of Family Protective Services, or DFPS, is more commonly known as Child Protective Services, or CPS. For this webinar, CPS will be used to address this government agency. When reporting to Child Protective Services, CPS, knowing what to expect during the reporting process may alleviate the anxiety of the unknown and reduce potential trauma that could occur to both the reporter and the victim. To better understand the reporting process, you should first know what to do when a child reports abuse or makes an outcry. When the child discloses this information, the most important thing you can do, perhaps the hardest, is remain calm. The child may have had to work up the courage to tell you about the abuse. By staying calm, you can help the child feel safe in their decision to share this with you. While you need enough information about what happened to make a report, it is very important that you do not ask leading questions. You should let the child tell you what they experienced in their own words. If the child does not give enough information initially, follow the what, who, when, and where method to ask for clarification. For example, what happened? Who was involved? When did this happen? Where? The location, at home, at school, or location of physical harm to the body. If a child says, "My mom hit me last week," respond by asking, "What happened?" Typically, the child will share more about what occurred. Perhaps the child responds, "Mom hit me in the face because she was mad." It is always important to clarify who they are referring to. The child could have a mother and a stepmother, or could use the word mother interchangeably due to language deprivation. Respond by asking, "Who hit you?" If you know the name of possible people involved, do not use them. Asking, "Did Sally hit you?" is a leading question. Let the child respond regarding who they are talking about. If they respond, take note of the name they provided. The most important information when making a report is what happened and who was involved. But if the conversation is going well, you can ask when and where it happened. Be sure to thank them and let them know you appreciate them sharing this. Tell them that you want to make sure they are safe. Depending on the child's age and the nature of the allegation, you may need to let the child know that you'll be making a report to ensure their safety. You do not need to over-question the child. The goal is to get the basic information down to make a report. If the child does not share specific information, just move on to the next part or conclude your questions and thank them for sharing. The goal is to get minimal information to make a report. The investigator will be responsible for filling in the gaps. If you need to take notes, please do so. For example, names of location, names of people involved, where the incident occurred, write those down. However, if your school or workplace has a policy or procedure in place, you must follow those procedures. Once you receive an outcry of abuse, it must be reported. Reporting suspected abuse to CPS is important because it is the law. To better understand reporting laws in Texas, it is vital to know that the Texas Family Code is a set of laws that govern family relationships and child protection in Texas. The Texas Family Code is designed to ensure the child's best interests are being met and grants CPS the responsibility to investigate allegations of child abuse and neglect. Texas Family Code Section 261.101A states that reporting suspected child abuse is the law. Everyone in Texas is a mandated reporter and is legally responsible for reporting suspected child abuse, neglect, or exploitation to Child Protective Services. Failure to report child abuse or neglect can result in legal consequences. This law also protects reporters who make a report in good faith and safeguards reporters facing other legal action for making the report. Not only is it the law, but deaf children have an increased risk for abuse and are more likely to be abused than their hearing peers. This increased risk may be due to difficulties with language deprivation, additional disabilities, behavior management, and social emotional functioning. If you feel you have information that requires a report, CPS asks that all reports of suspected abuse be made to CPS as soon as possible, but no later than 48 hours. This time frame is a guideline. You can still make a report if you exceed the time frame. However, it is best to report as soon as possible. The quicker CPS receives the information, the faster they can follow up to ensure the child's safety. If you are unsure if your concerns constitute abuse, neglect, or exploitation, or if your concerns are reportable, you can visit the DFPS webpage or the Texas Family Code for more information. This is where you will find the legal definitions of each type of abuse. Keep in mind that you do not have to have proof of abuse to make a report. You only have to suspect abuse may be occurring. If you're uncertain if a report should be made, it is best to go ahead and make the report. There may be other reports to CPS or even an open CPS case, and your information could be vital. There are two ways to make a report to CPS. You can call CPS at this phone number, or you can complete a report online by visiting the DFPS webpage. There are pros and cons to each reporting method. If you choose to make a report by phone, some of the pros are, for one, an intake worker will ask for specific information needed for the case and will be able to clarify the information they need. It is more of a conversational type of report. Also, you can ask if your report will be accepted for investigation. Not always, but most of the time, the intake worker will know from the information provided if the case will be sent for investigation. Another pro is you can ask for a reference number that can be used to add additional information to your report. This is very helpful if you have a situation that may be ongoing or where new concerns arise. With the reference number, you can add any new information to the previous report by letting the intake worker know you have a reference number. You do not need to give all the information from the previous report again. Reports can be made anonymously, but providing your name and information will help the CPS worker gather more detailed information, and they can follow up more thoroughly. Now for the cons. There may be a long hold time. When calling CPS, I expect a hold time of an hour. It's sometimes shorter, and the hold time is only 15 to 20 minutes. A majority of the wait time is 30 to 40 minutes. You should expect some time to make this call. Please do not let this discourage you from making a report. It can be overwhelming when CPS asks for additional information that you may not have. If you choose to report online, there are also pros and cons. Some of the pros include there's no hold time and the report can be made quickly. The website is easy to navigate. Some of the cons of reporting online are sufficient writing skills and the use of keywords are important when reporting online. If there's not enough information in the online report, then the report may not be accepted. As with any data system, the system can crash. If CPS cannot keep up with the demand, online reports are not considered a high priority, and it may be months before CPS follows up on the report. This has happened in the past. If the situation is urgent, CPS does not recommend the online reporting method and asks that you call so they can act quickly. CPS reports cannot be made anonymously. Identifying information is required to establish an online account. Everyone has a personal preference on how to report. I prefer to report by phone. Because I can ask questions and get a sense of where the report is going, I can even ask at the end of the report if it will be investigated. And if they say no, I can find out more about why it was not accepted. I might be missing information that comes up later, and I can call and add to the report. Or maybe the report was not considered abuse as I thought. Overall, it helps me to become a better reporter. During the initial report, CPS will ask for identifying information for the victim, such as their name, address, birthday, social security number, and parent contact information. This information must be shared with CPS to the best of your ability. If CPS cannot identify the child, they will not be able to follow up appropriately and take the protective action that may be needed. You do not need all this information, but should provide what you know. After collecting identifying information, the intake worker will ask why you are calling. Share as much information as possible. If you have specific dates or timelines of events, that can be very beneficial. If you have information on other people who may be involved, you should also share this information. It is okay not to have all the information that CPS needs. I encourage you to respond to questions you don't know by telling the CPS worker that you do not know. You can use phrases like, I do not have access to that information, or not that I am aware of. It's okay to let the CPS worker know that you do not have information. Not being able to answer CPS's questions can be intimidating for some people, and reporters may end the call feeling their report was not satisfactory. I want you to feel confident to let CPS know you do not have specific information. If the information is needed, CPS will gather this during their investigation. Never try to add or make up information that you do not have. These reports are important, so make the reports to the best of your ability. After you've provided the information and the call is coming to a close, CPS will provide you with a reference or ID number. make sure you save this number. This number can be used to add new or additional information to the report. At the end of the call, you can ask the intake worker if the case will be referred to a CPS investigator for investigation. Usually, the intake worker will be able to let you know if the case will be referred or not based on the information you shared. While CPS is responsible for protecting children from abuse, neglect, and exploitation, CPS receives many reports and has to follow criteria to respond to high-priority cases effectively. This means, for example, that a report of physical harm or a visible physical injury may take priority over emotional abuse. CPS often refers reports to other agencies. For example, if the report contains indications of criminal offenses, the report would be shared with the Child Abuse Unit and may be investigated by the police department instead of CPS or even with CPS. With this in mind, it is important to note that the CPS process can vary depending on the particular circumstances of each case. However, if CPS chooses to investigate, they usually begin by contacting the reporter for additional information, so expect that you could receive a call for more details. The investigation may involve a visit to the child's home or school, interviews with family members and other caregivers, and an assessment of the child's physical and emotional well-being. CPS will work to determine if the child has been abused or if the family needs support and resources to address their needs. Depending on the severity of the situation, CPS may take temporary custody of the child while the investigation is conducted. CPS's goal is to provide the necessary support to families to prevent the child's removal from their home and promote a positive outcome for the child. Therefore, it is rare that the child is removed during this process. CPS has a reputation for removing children from the home. However, this only occurs in extreme cases. Please do not let this prevent you from making a report. As mentioned previously, each CPS case varies depending on the type of report, but it can also vary due to the investigator's approach. In some cases, the reporter will work closely with CPS, especially if the reporter works in a school setting. One would hope for collaboration when working with the investigator, but this is not always the case. I have worked with investigators who would go above and beyond for minor reports. Other investigators have been dismissive of reports that I consider very concerning and have rushed to close the case. However the investigator conducts the investigation, you must remain helpful and professional and continue providing the support they need. Do not engage in a power struggle. In other cases, you might make a report and never hear anything from anyone. When you do not hear anything from CPS, don't be discouraged. CPS reports are confidential, and things that you are unaware of could be happening. You must find comfort in the fact that you did your part by reporting. When you have additional information about the case, the investigator may ask you to contact them directly. I recommend using the reference number and adding the information to the initial report. By doing this, the new information is documented and there is better follow-through by CPS. When you inform the caseworker directly, the information is not always documented. Advocating for the child to ensure their needs are met is crucial. CPS should be notified if the child or family has additional disabilities so they can be mindful of this during their interactions with the child or parent and provide the appropriate support. I have found the best way to do this is by starting with the intake process. every time I make a report to the intake worker, I let them know that the child is deaf and needs an ASL interpreter and, depending on the child's age and communication ability, a certified deaf interpreter, a CDI. I also inform them of any additional disabilities that the child has. Once the intake is completed and the investigator contacts me for further information, I share this information again with the investigator, letting them know any communication needs or additional disabilities. Advocacy can be a difficult and ongoing process. There have been times when an interpreter was necessary for communication access and CPS showed up without an interpreter. There have also been times when CPS arrives with only one interpreter, an ASL interpreter, but did not have a certified deaf interpreter for a young child. There have also been times when CPS has shown up with a video remote interpreter for a young child, which is not appropriate. Each time I have had to advocate for the child. One important tool I use is the Child Protective Services Handbook. Section 1251 of the handbook requires CPS to provide their own interpreter, and the interpreter must have the appropriate level of certification. There have been times when I have had to refuse to allow CPS to interview the child because they did not have an interpreter. On these occasions, the CPS worker usually tries to see the child by saying they need to take a picture or just see that the child is safe. However, the handbook clearly states that CPS is required to provide an interpreter for any contact with the client. While advocating can be difficult, communication access is important to the validity of the case. If the investigator has limited information, they may close the case prematurely, and the child will not be able to get the support they need. If you have sign skills but are not certified, please do not attempt to interpret or facilitate communication between the investigator and the child. If the case were to go to court, the child's statement that you assisted with would not be admissible in court because you are not a certified interpreter, and the case could be dismissed. This could cause unnecessary harm to the child. Suppose you feel that your report was not followed up appropriately, or the investigator was unprofessional, or communication access was not sufficient. In that case, you can report your concerns to the investigator's supervisor by calling the intake number and letting them know you want to contact an investigator's supervisor. The intake worker will share with you the phone number of the local CPS office for you to contact. When the case is closed, CPS sends the reporter a letter or an email informing them that the case has been closed. Usually, it will be by letter, but there have been times when I've received an email. While this notification should be received after every case closure, per CPS policy, this does not always happen. Sometimes you will not be informed that the case was closed at all. Other times, you could receive the letter months after the case was closed. If you have new or additional concerns and the case has been closed, you need to make a new report to CPS. When reporting to CPS, one expects that their report is confidential and that they will not be identified as the reporter. While this is usually true, there are times when the investigator will tell the parent who made the report or provide information about the report that makes it clear who the possible reporter may be. When that happens, you may find yourself dealing with an upset parent. Respond to the parent by remaining calm and listening to their concerns. Tell the parent you understand. Let them know that you are legally required to report and that their child's safety is both of your priorities. It is also helpful to inform the parent that you would have reported the alleged allegation if it was regarding any child. Listening to the parent, sharing that it is required by law, and that you would have been required to report regardless of who the child is, allows the parent to feel heard and understand they were not targeted. Reporting to CPS can be a complex and emotionally challenging experience. As a reporter, practicing self-care is important. Recognizing any past trauma that the reporting process could trigger is also important. For example, maybe your family or someone you are close to was investigated by CPS. Or maybe you were abused as a child. There are many ways this process can be a reminder of past trauma. Acknowledging this and knowing how to cope can be very beneficial and may reduce secondary trauma. Educate yourself. Learning more about the CPS process and what to expect may be helpful. The more you know may lessen the anxiety and fear you may experience. Take care of yourself. Do mindfulness exercises and practice coping strategies such as reading a book, taking a warm bath, or meditating. Seek emotional support from appropriate mentors, supervisors, colleagues, and mental health professionals to help manage the stress and anxiety that may come with reporting. Also, be mindful of secondary trauma that could occur. The reporting process can be overwhelming for the reporter, and although the report is made in the child's best interest, it can also be traumatizing for the child as well. And, in cases where multiple reports are made, re-traumatizing for the child. While the reporter has ways to learn about the process and seek emotional support, the child does not have this privilege and often goes through the investigation process not knowing what is happening. The child typically does not know why the stranger from CPS wants to see them or why they ask them so many questions. When their parents learn of the report, they may become upset, and the child often internalizes this and believes they are to blame. Parents will sometimes tell the child not to talk to CPS or even tell the child to tell CPS specific lies. Or that if they don't, CPS will take them away. That creates an irrational fear of CPS. But the child is too young to understand this and believes that the parent who is supposed to protect them is being honest when they say that CPS will take them away. One child told me they could not talk to CPS because CPS would shoot them. As providers, we must find ways to minimize potential trauma for the child and recognize that mental health is a crucial aspect that affects the well-being of children, their families, and the reporter. Communicate with the child about what is going on. This does not mean you will share specific information with the child, but you will let them know what the process is, what is happening. You'll say, CPS is here to interview you. We have an interpreter. Do you want a person in the room with you? Make sure they feel comfortable and safe. You can also tell them what they can do if they do not feel safe. For example, they can tell CPS they're not feeling comfortable. They can tell CPS that they'd like to leave the room. And tell them that they can ask CPS to have a person there with them during the interview process. Second, provide the necessary support and resources to help the child address their needs. Third, provide access to mental health or counseling services. And fourth, wraparound services. Behavioral or social services can support the child by providing coping skills, developing a safety plan, and improving communication. Reporting to CPS is necessary to ensure the student's safety, but that does not mean the process is easy. As I have shared, it can be challenging and can impact the mental health of those involved. I hope by sharing this information, you now have a better understanding of the CPS reporting process and how to lessen the impact of trauma and mental health. Thank you.